right. Shalom and Baruch Haba. Welcome to Congregation Mashiach Yisrael's advanced study of Tanya. Tonight we're going to be studying chapter 8 of Tanya and finishing up our section of spiritual composition. We made a bracha and we made our prayer earlier tonight when we started chapter 7, so let's just go ahead and continue and jump in the material here. Chapter 7, we talked about the Klipat Noga in a nutshell. We're speaking about the spiritual composition of the world. We're trying to explain this important verse from Deuteronomy 30:14. This thing, Torah and mitzvot, it's very near to you in your mouth and your heart that you should be able to do it, and God should allow us to do it. In order to explain that, the Alter Rebbe is talking about the concept of a tzaddik, a righteous person, a rasha, a wicked person, a Beinani, hopefully us, right? Someone in between. Someone who doesn't sin, but is still tempted. And in order to describe all of that and explain the more true definition of Beinani, the Alter Rebbe began describing we each have two souls, and each soul is made up of 10 soul powers, and each soul has 3 garments of expression, thought, speech, and deed, and it's these things that make everything tick. So last chapter, in chapter 7, earlier tonight, we studied the Klipat Noga. And again, Klipa means a husk or a shell. Just like a fruit comes to you wrapped in a peel of some sort, so also holiness comes wrapped up in everyday stuff for us, right? Mm-hmm. We want to not get caught up with the wrapper. We want to get to the actual fruit. As such, we discussed the structure of the Klipat Noga, this translucent husker shell, this part of husker shell, this part of impurity, you could say, that is kosher. You could use it for holiness, you could use it for negativity. Is gold good or bad? Yes. You could use it to build a golden calf. There's nothing more unholy than that. Or you could use it to build a holy temple. There's nothing holier than that, right? So it depends on what we do with it. That's Klipat Noga, which was covered in chapter 7. In chapter 8, we're going to finish off this section speaking about the Shalosh Klipot HaTameot, the 3 impure husks and shells. So, of course, this is going to be a little bit of a more heavy, darker conversation as we move through chapter 8 here. Let's jump right in. So, I guess just as a little bit of an introduction, just to repeat what I already said. Holiness is in the center, right? It's wrapped up in normal stuff, normal everyday stuff, Klipat Noga. And around that are these 3 impure husks and shells that we can't use at all. The Talmudic language that we talked about last chapter was mutar and isur, right? Mutar means permissible. Literally, it means untied, right? It's not tied to these 3 impure husks and shells, so I can use it. Whereas isur, bound or tied, means that this, whatever it is, a pig or an animal that was used for idol worship, or whatever the situation is, something that's tied to impurity, I can't get it off of there to elevate it to godliness. Okay?
Gotcha.
Okay. Chapter 8. There is an additional aspect in the matter of forbidden foods. Before we talked about a big juicy steak that you eat and a nice cup of spiced wine, aged wine, right? We're talking about a steak of beef, right? A kosher steak, right? Not treif in any way. What happens if it's not? So let's start with forbidden foods. The reason is that they are called isur, chained, tied, bound. The opposite of mutar, which we said last chapter, means untied, unbound, free. The reason is that they are called isur, chained or tied, is that even in the case of one who has unwittingly eaten forbidden food, intending it to give him strength so he could serve God by the energy of it, and he has, moreover, actually carried out his intention, having both studied and prayed with the energy of that food, nevertheless the vitality contained therein does not ascend and does not becomes enclosed. It does not ascend to become enclosed in the words of Torah or prayer, as in the case with permitted foods, by reason of being held captive, bound, tied in the power of the Sitra Achra, the other side of holiness, specifically the 3 impure husks and shells, the Shalosh Klipot HaTameot. So the Alter Rebbe is giving us an example here. Let's say there's a fine gentleman, right? Last chapter we said at 4 o'clock he eats, at 6 o'clock he studies, at 4 o'clock he eats, right? And what does he eat? He eats a meal. He thought it was kosher. He thought it was permissible. He thought it was mutar, right? The fact of the matter is, it wasn't, right? Lo unbeknownst to him, there was some milk in it. Or unbeknownst to him, it was actually, he thought it was a kosher fish, it was a catfish, it wasn't a kosher fish. Whatever the situation was, he didn't know, right? And he didn't eat it gluttonously. He didn't eat it self-servingly. He ate it in such a way that he should be able to go serve God with it. And he did, right? He actually went afterwards and he studied Torah and he prayed and he worshipped until the wee hours of the morning. So the Alter Rebbe asked a question. That divine spark of godliness, the spiritual energy that holds up everything, every object, every animal, every tree has it, right? This godliness that's contained, the spiritual energy of this food that he ate that was not kosher, does that spiritual energy, does that spark of godliness get elevated up to godliness, right? Can we elevate the spark out of that? Can we use this energy to serve God? And is he happy with that?
According to this, no.
According to this, no, right? The fact is, it's tied. Isur, chained, right? It's tied to impurity. You can't get it off of there and elevate it to God and make it a mitzvah now. It's not a mitzvah, it's a sin, right? So it's just the way it works. Yes, you can go ahead and serve God, but that energy that was doing it is not becoming holy energy. It's still in the realm of negativity. You're bringing impurity into the party, right? Thoughts on that? That's the basic gist. And we're going to kind of build off of that. This is so even when the prohibition is a rabbinic enactment, right? We're not just talking biblical mitzvah, we're talking chicken and cheese as well. And there's an opinion actually that says even more so with rabbinic commandments, right? Because rabbinic commandments are holy in that they keep us from sinning the really big biblical commandments, right?
Even more stringent than the words of the Torah.
Right. Rabbinic mitzvot don't permit things that are forbidden from Torah, ever, right? They only forbid things that the Torah considers permissible, but it's right on the edge, right? So the Torah, for example, says, Mashiach says, you shouldn't lust after a woman, right? You should be intimate with your wife and that's it, right? So the sages of the Talmud says, don't walk behind a lady you're not with, right? And you completely avoid the possibility of you going into a dark place with your mind, right? That's an example of a rabbinic hedge. Because the intention of that hedge is to keep people holy and pure. It's holy and pure itself, right? This is so even where the prohibition is a rabbinic enactment. For the words of the... You want to get under this? Oh, you are.
Because
Sure. This is so even a rabbinic commandment. For the words of the scribes, the Sofrim, are even more stringent than the words of the Torah and so forth. Therefore, also, the evil impulse, the Yetzer Hara, right? We have a Yetzer Tov, a good inclination. Where does that come from within us?
Godly soul.
The godly soul, right? The spark of God that lives within us. The spark of Mashiach that lives within us. We have a Yetzer Hara, we have an evil inclination. Where does that come from? The little red devil that sits on my shoulder, right? That's the animal soul, right? It comes from the animal soul. And it is encouraged by forces of darkness, who shall not be named. And the force that strains after forbidden things. Wait a minute, let's start over here. Therefore, also the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse, and the force that strains and strives after forbidden things is a demon of a non-Jewish demon, which is the impulse, the evil impulse of the Yetzer Hara of the nations of the world. And when we say nations, we don't mean righteous Gentiles, we mean idolaters, right? People who are only out for themselves, whose souls are derived, their souls, the souls of idolaters, are derived from the three unclean klipot, just like the soul of a pig is derived from the three impure klipot. Does that make sense? So, concept here, there are Jewish demons, may God protect us, and there are non-Jewish demons, may God protect us. Typically, Jews aren't tempted, and when we say Jews, I mean righteous Gentiles. Typically, we're not tempted by things that are non-Jewish demons. What's an example of a non-Jewish demon?
Idolatry.
A desire to bow down and kiss an idol, right? Typically, we do not have that urge, right? Even other things like to get up and rob the Bank of England, right? It's an, as Rabbi Gordon said, just a cute example, I guess, a wild example. These aren't things we're tempted with, right? What is a Jewish demon?
What is a Jewish demon?
What are we usually tempted with?
To not do positive mitzvahs.
To not do, right? Laziness.
Omission of mitzvahs.
Laziness is a Jewish demon. May God protect us.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts?
It's a guess.
Yeah, that's right. Overindulgence. Overindulgence in what's permissible, right? Not forbidden. As Rabbi Gordon of blessed memory said, no yeshiva bacher ever woke up craving a ham sandwich, right?
Right.
He wanted triples in dessert. That's what he wanted. He didn't want a ham sandwich. He wanted something that was kosher, but he wanted a lot of it, right? That's an example of a Jewish demon, and the ham sandwich is a non-Jewish demon, okay? Different negative forces coming from the impure husks and shells that influence us and influence our animal soul and trigger our Yetzer Hara in such a way to get us to sin, tempt us to sin. This is the functionality of demons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as such, may God protect us. This is how they work.
And they're evil spirits.
Right.
They're not the little devil sitting on our shoulder.
No, well, kinda, I guess, but don't think of them like that. It's not accurate. But you'll hear people, preachers, talking about our adversary, right, and saying that, he's smart, right, and a lot of preachers and teachers out there focus way too much on the forces of darkness, and it's not healthy, and that's a big problem. Aside from that, they'll go on and talk, and they'll say, oh, he's smart, he's not gonna, he's gonna get you the way that you're gonna be able to do it, how is he gonna take his soul? By discouraging and all this other stuff like that. They say he's smart. So, whatever. The fact of the matter is, there are certain things that the forces of darkness are going to try to get us to do because they know it's going to work, and there's other things that it's not going to work like that, right? Example would be our evil inclination, our animal soul even, is very quiet typically during the time of prayer, right? When we're engaged, or in Torah study, when we're engaged in like highly godly stuff, the Yetzer Hara is not going to try to pick a fight right now. It knows the godly soul is strong right now and shining right now. It's going to wait till the godly soul's asleep, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the stuff we're talking about. And again, typically it's not the style of Chassidut, Chassidism, to dwell on these things. Definitely not the style. However, the Alter Rebbe is trying to paint us a roadmap here and a picture of how the world functions in order that we should be able to influence how we understand the world, therefore influence our emotions, so we could actually serve God with a true heart, la soto, so that we should actually do it, because it is possible. Questions? Okay. On the other hand, the evil impulse and the craving force after permissible things to satisfy an appetite is a demon of the Jewish demons. For it can be reverted to holiness, as explained above. Where above? In chapter 7, where we just studied, right? If you overindulge in something permissible, you can get it off of that shalosh klipot hatameo. You can get them out from the impure husks and shells and bring them back to holiness, and it can be done. And it's possible, and it just takes a little teshuvah and some hard work. If it's a negative thing, you can't elevate a ham sandwich, right? A ham sandwich is tied specifically. So Jewish demons are going to tempt us to do something that is going to be in such a way that we are going to maybe miss the opportunity to do that teshuvah and elevate it out, right? If a overindulgence and laziness one hit us with a 1-2 punch, we might actually keep that stuff that has fallen to the 3 impure husks and shells and leave it there, because, God forbid, right? We said that there's a time limit on that in chapter 7. For it can be reverted to holiness, as explained above. Nevertheless, before it has reverted to holiness, it is still sitra achra. What is it that we're talking about here? Whatever you did, this klipat noga that you changed and denigrated, right? You had something permissible and you made a mess of it. You didn't use it for a mitzvah, right? It's during that time that you haven't elevated it, it's completely impure and unholy and evil, because it's it's connected now and attached to the 3 impure husks and shells. But you can get it off of there with a little, like we said, teshuvah and hard work. Nevertheless, before it has reverted to holiness, it is sitra achra and klipa. And even afterward, a trace of it remains attached to the body, as we said briefly in chapter 7. Since from each item of food and drink are immediately, and immediately is kind of an expression, right? It doesn't take very long. formed into the blood, the dam, and the flesh, the basar of his flesh, right? What happens to the stuff you eat? It turns into your flesh and blood.
It becomes you.
It becomes you, right? Yeah, exactly. So there's a trace of this impurity that still hangs on to specifically to your body, not your soul. Okay? That's good news and also a problem. Let's see here.
That is why the body.
That is why the body. I'm going to start putting my finger here.
Here, baby.
That's okay, don't worry about it. That is why the body must undergo what we call this Gehenna experience, this purgatory of the grave, in order to cleanse it. And again, when we talk about punishment, which we don't often talk about in Chassidut, when we talk about punishment, it's always in the form of cleansing, right? What's the example that I was given by my teacher, Rabbi Gordon, of blessed memory? He said, the kid, he's playing wild, he's climbing up the tree, right? And he's going, and the mom says to him, hey, you better stop climbing and playing wild like that because you're going to fall out of the tree and you're going to cut yourself. And then we're going to have to go to the hospital and get stitches and you're not going to like it. So does the kid listen? He says, no, kids never listen, right? So the kid goes, he plays wild. When the kid plays wild, he falls out of the tree, God forbid. He gets hurt, he gets cut. And the mom says, well, now you've done it. You went ahead and cut yourself open, so we're going to have to go to the hospital and you're going to get stitches now. And the kid says, no, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Don't take me to the hospital. I don't want stitches. Don't punish me. You know? And the mom says, what do you mean punishment? It's not punishment. No, this is cleansing. I mean, we need to get this cleaned out. We need to get it sewn up. Otherwise, God forbid, you could bleed out or get an infection. Or that's the imagery of this Gehenna that we talk about, this concept of hell. Okay? And again, the purgatory we use in English. I'm not 100% familiar with the Catholic ideas. I'm sorry. But we use the word purgatory, not hell, specifically because it's a temporary process, right? How long does it take to clean something? I don't know, maybe a long time. But it's not forever, right? Either it's going to get cleaned or it's not. And God can clean everything.
A year or less.
Yeah, and in Jewish custom, we believe 12 months is the maximum amount of time you could spend in.
It must be that the root of the Roman Catholic teaching on purgatory is from the Jewish thought. It's so closely aligned.
It's so closely aligned, isn't it? It's fascinating.
I just studied Torah. So again, temporary process. This is why the body must undergo the purgatory of the grave in order to cleanse it and purify it of its uncleanliness which it had received from the enjoyment of mundane things and pleasures, which are derived from the uncleanliness or the uncleanness of the Klipat Noga and of these Jewish demons. Only one who had derived no enjoyment at all from this life in this world, as was the case with our saintly master, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi,
Prince?
is spared this, right? Do you know the story?
No.
No. So, Rebbe, as the Talmud calls him, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, was extraordinarily wealthy. One of the most wealthy, if not the wealthiest Jew of his time. And he was also a tzaddik, perfect tzaddik. He was a really, really holy guy. And they said about his table, Rebbe's table, had summer fruits. It was never lacking a summer fruit in the winter, and it was never lacking a winter fruit in the summer, right? He had whatever, and there was no refrigeration then, right? So he had whatever you needed whenever you needed it. And of course, this enabled him to be a great leader. It enabled him to have a relationship with, who was it? Antonius, the Roman emperor at the time. And he was able to have a relationship and a friendship with him, although they kept it secret. But this wealth and this affluence enabled him to be a good Jewish leader. And he took that money and that power, that Klipat Noga, and he used it to redact the Mishnah, right? And the Talmud, as we know it today, is based off the Mishnah, which was, again, redacted by the Rebbe. And they wrote down the oral law, even though typically we don't write down the oral law. They had an emergency situation. Someone like Rebbe made this call saying, we're already losing it, right? We don't have a central capital anymore. Jerusalem's been destroyed for years. We're losing these pieces of oral law. It needs to be written now, right? So he went and, they didn't write down the oral law, but the students, they all had notebooks, right? Everybody had their notebook. So the students had bits of oral law, and he compiled and redacted, like we say, all of the Mishnah, all of the oral laws we know.
Time period, this is first or early second century?
I don't know. When did Mark Antony do his thing?
I don't know.
I don't know. After the destruction of the temple.
After the destruction, okay.
Right.
It was around the time of Yada,
Right.
probably.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
So, what was interesting about Rebbe, he had all of this wealth and all this money and all this power, but he never derived 1 ounce of enjoyment from it. He was wired different. Any tzaddik is wired different. Like we were saying earlier, he was born with, in this case, but other tzaddikim can train themselves to only find pleasure in elevating sparks of godliness, right? They don't find pleasure in food. Would you like a piece of paper, brother?
No,
Are you sure? I got a minute.
I'm positive.
Okie dokie.
The tzaddik looks at things differently,
Probably
right?
gonna wash that hand.
It doesn't look like the tzaddik doesn't look at things like I'm hungry, right? Like Hillel Hazakin, right? Hillel the elder, he said, I've realized, he said to his students, I need to go do an act of kindness to a lowly creature, right?
He's gotta
And
go
he said,
feed.
we got to do an act of kindness, and they're all ready to help him. What do we got to do? He's like, my body, I need to feed my body or I'm going to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hillel was this great Torah scholar who would forget to eat. Because he looked at things differently, right? Life to him was about elevating sparks. It was not about the next 7-Eleven run, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever it is that we do that we think we need to do. There's another aspect of that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi here had a health issue, right? He had an ulcer that kept him from really enjoying any aspect of his life, really. And as such, because he didn't derive any bit of enjoyment from his life, he never had to go through this Gehenna experience because he never selflessly indulged. So it never left a mark or a stain on his body that needed to later be scrubbed off. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
That's the story of Rebbe, the redactor of the Mishnah. Great guy. Thoughts on that? No thoughts at all? Come on, I mentioned an ulcer. All right, moving on.
Why did he have an ulcer?
I don't know. Obviously, it helped him to be able to accomplish that which he needed to accomplish.
Okay.
Hashgacha
Looks
Pratit.
like Paul having
Or
his eyes.
his buddy there. Or Paul's eyes, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, there's a footnote for number 7, the purgatory, wherein the soul is cleansed of.
7? We're not even close to 7.
We're not?
No.
Bob.
But we just
Bob.
talked about purgatory. Oh, there's 4.
We'll get to it. I promise.
Okay.
So that's an example of food, okay? Let's use another example. As for innocent, idle chatter, right? The idea, we all know these people, right? And you just set them down someplace and they just talk and talk and talk and talk and it never stops and it's never about anything and they just keep going and it's very impressive how that is. Like they don't even need a breath and they just or they're texting you, right? And you get that stream of consciousness text.
No.
It's like 7 texts at once. No Lashon Hara, please.
It's not last an hour. I think it's hysterical.
It's Lashon Hara can be funny. It's still not appropriate.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, innocent idle chatter. We're not talking sin. We're not talking sinful talk. Innocent idle chatter. Such as the case of an Amma Arts, someone who's not very wise, someone who's not very scholarly, someone who cannot study. He still must undergo cleansing of his soul, right? He didn't sin. It's permissible for a person who doesn't know how to study Torah to talk about whatever he's going to talk about, right? This is not forbidden stuff. The fact of the matter is, it still leaves a stain on your body, right? And that stain still needs to be dealt with in some way. He must undergo cleansing of his soul to rid it of the uncleanliness of this klipa through its being rolled in the hollow of a sling. So this is the first of the 2 that we talk about.
Rolled in the hollow of a sling.
I'm just looking at a note here real quick. So it's called Kaf Hakela. This is one of the 2 punishments, or we don't say punishments, cleansings that take place in the purgatory of the grave in the Gehenna here. We're going to talk about 2 tonight. This one's called Kaf Hakela, and it's being rolled in the hollow of a sling. So what does this mean? There's a footnote here. 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 29. And the soul of your enemies, he will sling it with the hollow of a sling. Eschatologically interpreted in the Talmud tractate Shabbat, page 152, side B. So,
That was helpful.
you think so?
No.
Oh. So there's biblical sources, there's Talmudic sources, there's Kabbalistic sources talking about what this experience is. The Kaf HaKela is an experience that your soul goes through in the process of judgment, right? Basically, what happens, and think of like a back and forth, like a sling, right? When you swing a sling, you're going round and round, you're going back and forth, okay? So the concept is, your soul is shown a video, let's say, of your life and what happened. You know, they say like all your life flashes before your eyes and all that stuff. So your soul is shown a video of what it could have been, right? The potential of what you could have done. If you made all the right choices, if you made all the right moral decisions, what could your life have looked like? Mm-hmm. Sounds lovely to imagine, right? Here's the other side of that sling. Then they show you what you did. And for many people, I've heard that this is enough, and they don't need to go through any other cleansing than that. And that's the entirety of hell for them. Just this showing what they could have been, and then showing how they measured up to that. There's a commentary for our sages, as I learned from Rabbi Gordon. He said that another meaning for the angels going up and down the ladder in Jacob's story is that the angels were amazed. They go up, they see Yaakov's visage on high, right? His chaya, and they see his actions down here on earth. And the angels were amazed that they're the same, right? Yaakov Avinu is one of the first, one of the only people in history who perfectly accomplished his potential. He didn't slip. Wow. He did everything he was supposed to do. Despite the situations and the circumstances he was in, he accomplished his potential, right? So this is called the Kaf HaKela, the hollow of the sling, as it's mentioned. And the concept is they show you what you could have been and then what you were. And this is supposed to wake you up a little bit, I suppose. And it does a process of cleansing the negativity that you've absorbed in your body throughout your life. As is stated in Zohar Parshat Bashalach, page 59. But with regard to forbidden speech, right, before we said idle chatter that's not forbidden. Now we're talking about specifically forbidden speech, such as scoffing, slander, lashon hara, may God protect us, and the like, which stem from, where does that come from? When you bash somebody, you know, does that come from the permissible side of things or the impure side of things? Comes from the shalosh klipot hatameot. That's the topic of this chapter 8 here. The hollow of the sling alone does not suffice to remove the uncleanliness of the soul, but it must descend into Gehenna, the purgatory. John, I ask you real quick to just go ahead and let Buddy in?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sorry about that. Oh, watch the bottom. I'll stall for you. So, we said that if you didn't do a sin, but you didn't maximize your potential, you got to go to the Kaf HaKela, right? They have to have shown you. If you did sins, it's a different kind of stain, and you need to, the sling alone is not going to cut it. You're going to need more like the Brillo pad treatment, right? This is called the shaking, which we're going to get into here. Thoughts on that or questions so far?
Get out of jail free card?
That's a good question.
I think Yeshua says tonight you will be with me again. I wonder if there's a...
We say, you know, the whole process of Gehenna is a limited process. Thank you
Right,
so
but
much.
thank
I'm
you,
sorry to
John.
get you up.
But it could be, it's not 11 months though.
Right, we say Kaddish for someone for 11 months after they pass because
You never know.
we don't want to insult them by saying they needed the full 12 months, right? So we only ever say 11. But that's a good question, you know. Does belief in Yeshua HaMashiach allow you to pass through some of this judgment without having to go to judgment? Right? Is it possible? I think it's a little bit tough to say that because in the Sermon on the Mount alone, right, he talks about cutting off limbs so that you don't get thrown into the Gehenna, right? He wasn't talking to the people who weren't going to follow him, was he?
It seems to depend on the sin and its root.
I think it's possible. It's an interesting discussion as to exactly what this means So I'd be interested in any kind of input. That could be your homework. How's that sound? All right, so you didn't sin, but you didn't fulfill all of your potential, so you go to the kafakela. You did sin, we need a deeper cleanse. So too, he who is able to engage in the Torah, he's able to. His background, he can study, he's not illiterate, right? He could actually read some words of Torah and study, but he occupies himself instead with frivolous things. The hollow of the sling, this kafakela experience, cannot itself effectively scour and cleanse his soul, but severe penalties are meted out for the neglect of Torah study in particular, right? Torah study is a really big deal. Why do we say it all the time? It's like, you'd think someone would just get it at some point. We say it all the time. Torah study is such an important, the most important mitzvah, as Rabbi Gordon said, because you can't get to first base in Judaism without Torah study, right? How can you serve God if you don't know what to do? And Rabbi Kaplan gave a great example of that. Have you ever gotten a gift from somebody that you didn't like? Who gave you the gift? It was your grandmother? She should, God bless her, no, not the point. Somebody gave you a gift that was close to you, right? They wanted to make you happy. They didn't want to make you sad, but they gave you a gift and it made you sad because this person didn't know you and they're here on earth with you. So how do you know how to serve God unless you study Torah? You don't. So Torah study is a really big deal, and it's actually the second question they ask you when you get to the judgment. Did you study my Torah? Right? Remember what the first question they ask you is? Do you remember?
Well, I had a joke. Never mind.
Oh. The first question is, were you honest in business? Right?
Were you honest in business?
Mm-hmm. And that's a setup for the second question was, well, why didn't you study Torah? All right. Is it appropriate?
I was going to say, did you ask Jesus to come in here?
Hey, well, we'll know.
Okay, that's not going to be on there.
I mean, it's God bless us. Everything's on. All right. So, not enough, right? You need a little bit more. Hollow sling's not going to cut it. And there, again, are severe penalties meted out for the neglect of Torah study in particular. It is critically important that we make sure that we set aside time every day like a business to study Torah. An hour in the morning, an hour at night. Minimum, no matter what you do, right? And we don't mean necessarily a solid hour. We mean a section of time, right? Set out yourself a section of time twice a day, something that's reasonable to whatever your career is, that would allow you to be able to get this stuff done. Torah study is so important. Let's see here. Neglect Torah study in particular, apart from the general retribution for the neglect of positive mitzvot, and sins of omission through indolence, namely in the purgatory of Schneur, as is explained elsewhere. So, what's the idea of this?
Footnote 7.
Oh yeah, we're getting there. Let's just introduce it a little bit. What is the idea of a sin of omission? You didn't do it, right?
Right.
God asked you to do something and you didn't do it.
The best example, or the highest, is the neglect of Torah study.
Torah study, that's the highest. He asked you to spend it. How much time studying Torah? When you get up, when you lie down, when you go out, when you come in, all of our time should be spent studying Torah, no matter what we're doing. So if you fall short on that, that's an issue. And again, this is the mitzvah that we break and we sin on every single day. Because we could always study Torah for another minute, or with a little more kavana, or whatever the situation is. So, sins of omission, I didn't get it done because I was cold towards you, right? I didn't get it done because I was doing my own stuff, and I gave you the cold shoulder. That's why you go the Gehenna of Snow. Right?
Purgatory of Snow.
Do you want to read the footnote?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
You go to the Gehenna of Snow because why?
Sins of omission.
You just don't do what you need to do.
You gave God the cold shoulder.
It was.
You get cleansed
right.
through cold.
And it's kind of like a hot sin of lust is a sin of
Sin of
commission.
passion. Right.
And the cool sin, like neglect of Torah study, is due to indolence or omission. You just didn't.
He asked you to do something and you didn't.
You didn't count it to be the most important thing. Okay? The purgatory, where the soul is cleansed of the stains acquired during its lifetime, so that it can then enter Gan Eden in the presence of the divine glory,
Shekhinah.
operates on the principle of measure for measure.
Measure
This
for
again
measure.
is an answer to your previous question, which you said go ahead and study. Does Mashiach actually cleanse all sin? What about this purgatory thing? Well, here, this is operating on this principle, simple principle. Messiah actually drew attention to it, measure for measure.
And that's it's all the way throughout the entire Bible.
Mm-hmm.
There are people out there who have pushed people away from God because they tell them that there's this eternal hell that they're going to burn in.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, oh, who is this big jerk up there who's going to be merciless to people for all of eternity? Do you have any idea how long eternity is? It's a really long time. Is there any sin we could possibly do that's worthy of eternal punishment? Again, do you know how long eternity is? It's like a long time. Measure for measure. That's how God works. That's what we learn about him in his Torah.
So back to the footnote. Thus offenses of commission caused by passion and lust are cleansed by a stream of fire,
Right.
while those of omission due to indolence or coolness are cleansed in the purgatory of snow.
Right, they get the cold rinse. And this is very similar to the idea of koshering kalim, right? If you've ever koshered a pot or something, okay, I got this pot from a friend and it was used to make some pork soup or whatever, right? Or clam chowder. I'm reaching here. Clam chowder, let's say, right? There was something impure in that. You can kosher that pot and use it again if it's not earthenware. How do you do it? The question is, what caused this item to become impure, right? If it was a soup, then it's water-based. You put boiling water in it, you take a blowtorch around the top that it wasn't wet on, and then it's clean, right? What about a barbecue grill? There wasn't water on that, right? It was all through flame. So that also is cleansed through flame. So also with us and our sins, if we're going to be cleansed by God, if we're going to be made kosher by God, it's going to be in accordance with what we did, very specifically in accordance with what we did.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if we gave him the cold shoulder, we get the cold rinse. If we said, I love you, God, but I just got caught up into this and I couldn't control myself, I was just so passionate, then you get the warm cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good footnote, huh?
It is a good footnote. Actually looking back at the text then, it says, severe penalties are meted out for neglect of Torah in particular. However, it's counting this as under a omission of a positive command.
Right, God told you to study Torah and you did.
And so it is delegated to the purgatory of snow, which seems so much less of a penalty than the cleansing by fire, stream of fire.
I guess so. I mean, it's not like you're being burnt. It's not physical fire we're talking about. It's not like there's some room up in heaven where God sends you and he locks you in there for some time. You're a spirit. It's not that, God forbid. We're spirits in heaven, right? We don't have a body. We can't feel physical pain, right? This is all emotional and mental that we're experiencing.
So again, we're using what do you call it? Metaphor here.
Imagery, almost like anthropomorphism, but not really.
Because it's
not human.
Metaphor.
But exactly.
But remember how terrifying that story. I love that story. Is that he said he was the worst thing. He couldn't even, and I guess he had other places where he wrote about how horrible was that one. We just can't imagine. So they use words to try to get us to
The Torah speaks in the language of man, yeah.
Relate, but we won't be able to understand past Shalom until, unfortunately,
Yeah, I mean, you see examples like that, like Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, we'll study next week. They passed in the opening day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. Fire came forth from the ark, and it entered into their nostrils, and they said it's like a string of fire, right? Okay. What would we call that today, probably?
A laser.
A laser, right? We have a word for that. However, we're trying to describe spiritual stuff that back then they didn't have the imagery of a laser like we do, right? So they say purgatory of snow, supposed to import in us the idea of coldness, being very cold, because we were real cold to God. Thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? No concerns. We should be very concerned about this material.
Well, the next part is pretty good. It's still talking about a neglect of Torah study, and now it kind of gives it a little different twist or aspect.
Yes. Moving into our next topic. Likewise, he who occupies himself with the sciences of the nations of the world is included among those who waste their time in profane matters, insofar as the sin of neglecting Torah study is concerned, as explained in the laws concerning the study of Torah. What's he talking about? It's forbidden to go to college? You can't go to university?
No, but if you raise it above, it's like the Greek mentality. It's like, that's your God.
So important. So important. And you see this with parents all over, you know. Not, of course, my parents. My parents are a bunch of tzaddikim. But they'll say, you know, oh, he's reading the Bible? Very good. You read it very well, you know. And then he comes home with an A+ on his math test. And you're like, wow, you did such a great job. We're going to go take you and get a video game. What's the kid think?
That
Obviously, the math is more important.
Much more important, right.
And that's a huge risk. That's a huge danger.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you study the sciences of the world? Why would you go to college? If you're a Torah-observant Jew or Gentile, what are you doing at college? Is it permissible? Can you go?
It's permissible as long as you do the Kalipha Noga, as long as you raise it up to a good thing instead of a bad thing.
It's knowledge, right?
Right.
Right. So what's an example of using it for good?
Well, it can be more than just knowledge. Like you said, a trade,
It's
a profession.
a profession.
So
Everybody
that's the
needs-
first one, right? There are two reasons why a Jew is allowed to go to college or study any of the sciences of the world, right? You don't even have to go to college. You could study online.
Disprove it.
That's right.
No.
My son, the doctor.
Yeah. No, there's lots of cultural stuff here.
Not
But
cultural,
it's a simple
we're
concept.
talking about real, yeah.
Any science that you study and engage in, you can do it by Torah law for one of two reasons. Either or. First reason, like you both just said, to build a shovel to dig with, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to make a career, then if you're going to be a doctor, you need to go to medical school, right? If you're going to be a lawyer, you got to go to law school.
Right.
So if that's the case, go ahead and do that. That's absolutely
which
fine.
is 8 years instead of just 4 years.
Right, well, there's lots of stuff there.
Right.
Not even mention internship
Well,
and fellowship and residency and
Sure,
everything.
Exactly.
All that stuff. What's the second reason why we're allowed to engage in the study of worldly sciences as opposed to engage in the study of Torah, which we should be doing all the time? Second reason, very important reason, to help you study Torah, right? To help you serve God better.
You would mean like a Bible college or yeshiva?
No, I'm talking about studying geometry because it helps you learn about the structure of the Mishkan. Or studying...
You were a science buff in school. Look at all the stuff you know because you said you studied all those sciences.
I look at the structure of the Mishkan and
So
I see
for-
the cellular structure of our cells. I look at the Mishkan and I see the structure of galaxies, right?
Right.
Except for a fulcrum.
Except for Fulton. I didn't study that. So, examples like this would be the Rambam and the Ramban. This is what I heard earlier today from Rabbi Gordon, right? The Rambam, one of the greatest rabbis in Jewish history,
Philosophy.
the great halachic codifier, he was a physician first, right? He was a doctor, right?
Doctor.
The Rambam was the Rambam because he was a doctor, because he was a brilliant mathematician, because he was also a brilliant philosopher, because he was also a brilliant astronomer, right? These things made him who he was, and he understood Torah on a different level because of that stuff. Absolutely, it's kosher to learn that stuff. Absolutely. And the same with the Ramban. He was also a physician and a philosopher, etc., etc. Right? These were educated men, and that helped them be who they were. And the other Rebbe, or the other example Rabbi Gordon gave was the most recent Rebbe. He went to college and he became an electrical engineer and he got degrees, right? And that allowed him to have a certain amount of, I guess you could say, authority or credibility in the worldly system,
This is funny,
right?
because he spoke about sparks when
Right, you know. Helped him to understand Torah, fine. But more than that, it helped him to be able to speak words of Torah and have the respect that he needed to be able to get the message across, right? Because he had a degree, he was listened to a little bit more. And therefore, it's worth getting a degree if you can teach Torah better that way, right? So those are the two reasons. And speaking of the Rebbe, it's also taught that he had said anybody who's interested in going to college, actually going to a university, should only do so really after having a solid foundation in the Bible. You know?
That'd be better. That'd be
And
smart.
two, preferably to be married and settled down before you go to school,
That's
because
probably a good idea too.
the environment over there, I don't think we need to tell anybody, you know, it's very bad. So it's very easy to get pulled off the path.
Mm-hmm.
So, likewise, he who occupies himself with the sciences of the nations of the world is included among those who waste their time in profane matters, right? If you're not studying science because you are trying to have a career or because you're trying to serve God better, then you're wasting your time. You should be studying Torah. Insofar as the sin of neglecting Torah study is concerned, as is explained in the laws concerning the Torah study, or the study of the Torah. Moreover,
which footnote 9 says
Okay.
was the first work of the Rabbi Schneur Zalman
Mhm.
of Liadi,
who's he?
the author of the Tanya.
He's the Alter Rebbe, right? It's good to pump the brakes every now and again.
Mhm. And that was in 1794.
All right. So, moreover, the uncleanness of the science of the nations of the world is greater than that of profane speech, for the latter informs and defiles only the midot. Profane speech only defiles your emotional attributes, which emanate from the element of the holy ruach within his divine soul, with the contamination of the klipat noga that is contained in profane speech, which is derived from the element of the evil ruach, wind, of this klipa in his animal soul, as mentioned above. Yet he does not defile his intellectual, right? Why doesn't someone who's engaging in lashon hora or wasted talk, wasted not even evil talk, but just wasted talk, why is he not defiling his intellect? It doesn't take intellect to waste words, right? You could just talk and talk and talk and not even have to think about it, right? You're not actually there.
People talk all the time without engaging their intellect.
You ever talk to somebody before and right in the middle of a sentence they're saying, "Oh, I just forgot what I was going to say," or they lost the words. Because you were miles away in your head. That's what that means, right? I thought we were having a conversation. All right. Okay. Yet he does not defile the intellectual faculties, the chabad of his soul, for they are but words of foolishness and ignorance, since even the fools and ignoramuses can speak that way. Not so in the case of the nation's sciences, right? If you're going to study a science, you need to engage your intellect. And if you study a science like biology, where they're pushing the concept of evolution down your throat and they don't explain what that really means, how evolution really works in God's system, you're defiling your intellect, right? And for what? If you're not doing it for a career or to serve God, then you really are wasting your time and toxifying yourself, I guess we could say. So the nation's science is whereby he clothes and defiles the intellectual faculties of Chabad and his divine soul with the contamination of the Klipat Noga contained in those sciences, whether they have fallen through the shattering of the vessels, the Shvirat HaKelim, out of the so-called hinder part of Chokhmah Kedusha, as is known to the students of Kabbalah. Right? So we're not saying that the sciences of the nations of the world is wrong. I mean, sometimes it is. We see that all the time, right? 5 years ago, they were like, fat is bad, and then like, or 10 years ago, they were like, fat is bad, and then 5 years ago, they were like, well, some fats are good, and now we really don't know.
Right. Soy's good for you.
Atkins,
oh, wait,
and then
redo.
Right. So that kind of stuff flops back and forth. It's almost like the Kaf HaKela, right?
Yeah.
Hollow of the slim. However, real truth that's there, concepts like gravity, right? This is godly wisdom that happened to fall, like these fallen sparks, and get implanted into the science of the nations of the world. Okay, fine. So it comes from a place of holiness. Unless he employs these sciences, like we said, as a useful instrument, as a means of a more affluent livelihood to be able to serve God, or knows how to apply them in his service of God and Torah. And this is the reason why Maimonides, the Rambam, and Nachmanides, of blessed memories, the Ramban, and their adherents engaged in them, right? This whole concept that the Rambam was the Rambam because he was a doctor, right? The Ramban was the Ramban because he was a philosopher, etc., etc. So, that's the end of chapter 8. We talked about the Shalosh Klipot HaTameot. We talked about what happens when too much of the Shalosh Klipot HaTameot gets attached to your body. Right? This is not good stuff. It needs to get cleansed off at some point. And that's not something we typically talk about. However, we hit it a little bit here. There's more to be said. There's a lot more to be said. But we kind of glossed over it here in such a way that we should be able to better understand what's really going on in the world. And that should go through our Chokhmah Bina and now Da'at, right? So that we should develop an opinion on that, have an emotional reaction to that, and it should help us to be able to serve God more. God willing.
This concept here, though, in the last section we read,
Yeah.
was kind of brushed over without much elaboration,
Okay.
which, for proper understanding, should require, I think, probably for all our parts,
Let's hit it again.
the contamination of the Klipat Noga, whether they have fallen through the shattering of the vessels out of the so-called hinder part of the Kokma of Kedusha,
Holiness.
as is known to the students of Kabbalah. So there's again this process of the shattering of the vessels, and just kind of exactly, and how they resulted in the contamination of the Klipat Noga.
Mhm.
It's just it's a concept that's still a little bit fuzzy to me.
Let's tighten it up. Tighten the screws, right? Oil can.
Yep.
So, God creates the world and plants these sparks of His holiness everywhere. Some of them fall within Klipat Noga, right? Some of them fall within Shalosh Klipat HaTameot. Very, very difficult to get them out of there. How do we say you get them out of there, by the way?
Okay,
In
this
chapter
is
7.
after the shattering. The shattering, because the vessels were not able to hold the intense divine light.
Right. Quantitatively and
Shattered and
qualitatively.
fell,
Right.
and eventually fell to Yesira, right?
Asiya, this world?
Asia, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's what one
Right.
one below.
Right.
And resulted in Klipat Noga, or the contamination thereof.
Right. So, contamination of the Klipat Noga is something that we engage in.
Now,
Right?
how do the
we
sparks?
denigrate it.
How do we get from the Klipat Noga, are the things of this world, the natural?
Right. Eating, sleeping.
So, and I guess there's just sort of a jump there, and I think there's another part that describes there was a jump, but we got from divine sparks
Right.
falling from the shattering of the vessels
Mm.
to the natural things of this physical things of this world,
Right.
but that's where I guess I'm kind of fuzzy, losing.
I got what you're saying. I'm not sure this is the best forum to go into a discourse
Perhaps
on
not.
the Shvirat HaKelim. In a nutshell, right? It's all about nutshells tonight. In a nutshell, the idea is that God, and we kind of said this a little bit before, God willingly gives energy, and there's some energy He throws behind His back because He knows it needs to be, right? The whole fact that, Klipa in general is called Sitra Achar, it's the other side, it's not holiness. So the fact that He has to energize that is a painful process for Him, for God, right? He doesn't really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And He injects holiness, really good stuff that we got to get out of there, into this stuff that He really doesn't like, right? So that's like a difficult process for Him. He creates the Noga, right? We defile the Noga.
Actually creating something for us to do.
Right, exactly. He's giving us a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, does that help a little bit?
A little bit.
A little bit. There's some other writings I can direct you to if you're interested in looking more into Shvirat HaKelim. These some of the Arizal's writing. Well, he didn't write anything, but Chaim Vital. Shvirat HaKelim. Shvirat, yeah. Let's see here. Maybe we could find it in the text. Right here. Do you have it? It's right there if you want the Hebrew for it.
Oh, well, where are you? What page?
The page we're on. Page I'm on.
Not anymore.
The chapter 8 to chapter 9 change
Oh.
over.
Okay, so you're on page 37.
Right. What am I? Slash from the top. Shvirat HaKelim, and it's abbreviated here for Kalim. Like these two words. But there's a bait as a prefix. So, other thoughts or questions on the Shalosh Klipot HaTameot? Do we have a working understanding of what a klipa is? After tonight we should, right? We talked it all night.
Mm-hmm.
What is a klipa?
It's a shell.
It's a shell. It covers the holiness. It is used as a delivery method to get us to holiness and to give us access to holiness. But we can't get caught up in the klipa noga and all that negativity, right? Because that's going to cause problems for us if we do it selfishly. We have to do it in order to get to the holiness. Okay.
These are the two words you're talking about.
No.
So
This one right there.
Shira? Oh no.
Shvirat.
Where?
Bishvirat. The one right before it.
That Bashir.
Bishvirat.
She. Oh.
Bishvira Sakelim.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Any other thoughts or questions? No. Who would like to close us in prayer? Oh, we'll give you a little teaser for next week first. How's that sound? Next week, we're going to start our new section of the war between the worlds. No, just kidding. The war between the souls. And our body is the battleground, right? We have a godly soul. We have an animal soul. And these two want control over this small city, right? And they're killing each other constantly because the two kings can't wear a crown, right? Only one soul is in control of you at any given time. And depending on what time of the day it is and what you're doing, we want to try to give the steering wheel to the godly soul as much as we possibly can.
Yeshua said it. You cannot serve two masters.
Hey, that's in the Bible somewhere. It's true.
Lisa, you want to pray?
I do.
Baruch Hashem.
Are you ready?
Bavakasha.
Okay. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we thank you so much again for beautiful Tanya study tonight. We thank you so much for helping us to understand the Tanya. We thank you for Rabbi Scott for helping us to see that you want us to grow and to know you and to live out your word each and every day in everything that we do, in everything that we say, and that we can elevate things in our lives that need to be elevated. And Father, we just thank you tonight for just helping us to know that we can grow closer to you by studying your word, studying your Torah, and being close to you each and every day. And Father, we thank you for all things in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Todah. Thank you. Amen. Shalom.
Good study.
Baruch Ba. Join us next week and we're going to cover chapter 9 in this new section of the War Between the Souls.
No. Next week is
No.
Oh, right.
second night of Passover.
Next time, then.
Bob, quick question about Passover. 2 turkeys.
Is it good?
How many people total are we really having?